Hello, and welcome to Album Review Insanity, where we review way too many albums. Today, we're going to be reviewing the first out of 100 albums from the first week of this year. I'm Laura Ingram, and this is Sarah Palin, Michelle Bachmann, Ann Coulter, Megyn Kelly, Marjorie Green, Lauren Boebert, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, Paris Hilton, Alex Trebek, Pat Sajak, Vanna White, Ken Jennings, James Holzhauer, Brad Rutter, Anne Frank, Mindy McCready, Greta Thunberg, Ponyboy Curtis, Soda Pop Curtis, Derry Curtis, Steve Randall, Two-Bit Matthews, Dally Winston, Johnny Cade, Phileas Fogg, Megan Phelps Roper, Ellen Ripley, Jeanette McCurdy, Miranda Cosgrove, Archie Bunker, Lionel Frost, and Archibald Snatcher. Before we get started, let's get some housekeeping out of the way. How this is going to work is we're going to review 100 albums from each week of 2025. The first week doesn't have much, so prepare for a bunch of obscure stuff. We'll be reviewing them in alphabetical order, which unfortunately means we're starting with some rando on Rate Your Music fanboying over a villain from a fandom most of us know nothing about.
AATROX, you could be my Baytrox, you could be the sun and the moon in my sky.
This album was made by Rate Your Music user Literally Newt. We did some snooping, and apparently, this dude has a girlfriend and makes good music under other stage names. Those two facts lead me to believe that this album, which sounds like it was written by a neckbeard, must be satire. Most of you probably don't know what I'm talking about, so let me start from the beginning. Basically, this is a concept album in which the protagonist falls in love with and has a relationship with Aatrox, who is apparently a villain in the popular video game known as League of Legends. It reads like a badly written fanfiction, right down to the incredibly gross sex scene in the song Aatrox Roadhead. No, I'm not kidding. It's the kind of thing a gay 12-year-old boy would write. However, I'm pretty sure it's a joke in this case. The problem is, the joke isn't really that funny to me. Sure, the ending where Aatrox takes our protagonist captive is a bit funny in how realistic it is, but the incessant repetition of Aatrox's name, combined with the creepily obsessed tone of the lyrics, just doesn't make me laugh. Also, Aatrox Roadhead may be my least favorite comedy song ever, thanks to its spoken word ramblings about, well, exactly what the title says, and the rapping on the closing track legit makes me want to die. 2 out of 10, who's next?
I'll go next. Man, what a hilarious album to kick off this series with. First of all, the opening track is called Baytrox. Literally Newt? You missed the opportunity to call the song Gaytrox. That would be way funnier. Joking aside, I will admit that the lyrics are a little funny. My interpretation of this album is that it's making fun of fanfics that romanticize villains, which is a decent enough concept for a joke album. That said, I will say the shitty rapping on Aatrox Fame and the overly long spoken word bit on Aatrox Roadhead were every bit as bad as Laura said, and the instrumentation itself was pretty meh, aside from a couple of moments. Even the concept doesn't remain funny throughout. The more emotional songs like Let Me Help You, Aatrox and Aatrox, Come Back to Me are not funny. They're just boring. Also, why the fuck is Aatrox's name repeated so many times? I get that our protagonist is obsessed, but can't he be obsessed while still being a clever songwriter? 4 out of 10.
I like the idea of the first song being called Gaytrox. If this album began with a song with that title, it would be a 10, no doubt. Not really, because even though the opening track is actually quite humorous, this album is so front-loaded it's not even funny. Tracks 7 through 11 on this album are all just boring. They're trying to add an emotional dimension to the humour, but instead they just come off as unremarkable. The closing track is one of the worst here due to, as you lot said, the terrible rapping. That said, I fucking loved the first half of this. Songs like Baytrox, Aatrox Got Nothing on Me, and Sly Aatrox are all great, and I'll actually say Aatrox Roadhead is my favourite song on here. The only song in the first half I don't care for is Oh Aatrox, which is also a bit boring. Overall, the good songs on this album are amazing, but there is so much that could be improved, especially the vocals, which are nerdy enough to make Rivers Cuomo sound like Jay-Z. That said, The good songs here are good enough to elevate it to a 6 out of 10.
Really, Archibald? Aatrox Roadhead is your favorite song on this album? I know you're gay, but how does the guy's nerdy voice not turn you off?
I like it because it's funny, not sexy.
Sure you do. Anyway, this album fucking sucks. It's not funny, and the singer sounds like just the kind of nerd who would write this shit. I will admit that some of the instrumentation is okay. Especially the heavier sound on Aatrox got nothing on me. That said, the noisier production really does not fit the upbeat Indie-tronica-tinged instrumentation. That makes it hard for me to listen to, even if I can ignore the cringe-inducing lyrics. It also doesn't help that the song Aatrox Roadhead is mostly just a really annoying spoken word piece with little to no instrumentation. How can I ignore the lyrics when there's nothing else to focus on? Also, the O's on Aatrox sound like our singer is gagging, and the rap on the final track is horrible. I get that it's meant to be a joke, but as epic movies should have taught us, just because it's a parody, doesn't excuse it from being poorly made. Hell, Ailstorm is a joke band, and their music sounds incredible. This is just bad, though I will agree that this guy has made good stuff under other names. 1 out of 10.
Wow, Anne, you hate this album even more than I do. For me, the worst thing about this album is the rap on that last song. That was atrocious, and I hope literally Newt never raps again. As for the rest, it's pretty bad. The singing is nasal, the production fucking sucks, and it's not funny. I appreciate what this album is trying to do, with the whole making fun of obsessed fans thing, but the execution is just not funny. There's too many obnoxious moments, such as the repetition of Aatrox's name on every song, not to mention everything about Aatrox Roadhead. It also has a lot of boring, pseudo-emotional instrumentation that drags the humor meter down even lower. Even the songs where the instrumentation is good get ruined by the lack of punch in the production. That said, not all of the songs are terrible, just most of them. 2 out of 10. I don't hate it as much as Anne, but it's damn close.
I'm glad you don't hate it as much as Anne, Corey. I, on the other hand, did. The concept is supposed to make me laugh, but I was writhing in agony during all 3 of our listens to this. Mainly because outside of the final track, which was terrible for other reasons, it feels too much like a real fan fiction to be funny. A guy falls in love with a video game villain. He behaves in a way that I can only describe as eerily obsessive. There's a sex scene, and then there's some emotional moments. It's not funny, it's just sad. Then there's the last song, Aatrox Fame, which has that god-awful rapped intro. The content of that one is a little bit interesting, if only because Aatrox holds our protagonist captive, which is realistically what would happen if someone fell in love with a villain. Unfortunately, the poor writing, and again that bloody rap verse, ruin any potential it might have had. Overall, this was atrocious. 1 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you guys. I wasn't a fan of this album at all. There were a few interesting instrumental moments, but like you said, Anne, noisy production and catchy Indie-tronica instrumentation is just not a good mix. The songs are neither as fun and catchy nor as intense as they could be. The vocals are nasal, and the concept is honestly pretty stupid. I get that everything I just mentioned is part of the joke, and I would be fine with all of this if it was actually funny. Unfortunately, it isn't. I don't think I laughed once during any of our 3 listens to this album. I don't mind comedy songs when they're funny, but this just isn't funny. I think my issue is that, like Phileas said, it only becomes obvious that this is a joke when you get to the last song. Everything else just feels like something some 12-year-old fanfic writer would write unironically. I get that jokes need a setup, but when the setup goes on this long with nothing funny happening, it just makes me wonder why I would want to sit through this. Yeah, as much as I'd like to support a fellow Rate Your Music user, I can't get behind this. That said, his other stuff is actually pretty good art pop. This, on the other hand, gets a 1 out of 10.
Wow, you guys are being too harsh. Personally, I thought the first 2 songs, Aatrox and Living with Aatrox, were hilarious. They had an upbeat, fun sound that fit well with lyrics about being in love with Aatrox. After that, I will admit that this album goes downhill a bit. There's some songs that try to be emotional and funny at the same time, kind of like the opening to I Got My Tooth Removed by 100 Gex, except significantly less funny. Then there are songs with annoying gimmicks like the closing track Aatrox Fame with its rapped intro, and Aatrox Roadhead with its spoken word middle and end sections. Both of these songs are easily the worst on the album. Also, I agree that the vocals on this are god-awful. I could see them working in a pop-punk band, but over this Indie-tronica instrumentation, Hell no, and I also say that to the mix of noisy production and upbeat Indiatronica. Still, it has enough high points to get a 4 out of 10.
Man, you know it's bad when it only has enough high points to get a 4. That's not very many high points. I can't say I disagree, though, because honestly, I wasn't a fan of this album either. While you guys were saying your piece, I was reading the comments on the Rate Your Music page for this album, and apparently Literally Nude himself doesn't know anything about League of Legends. Yup, definitely a joke, and not a particularly funny one, either. I get that it's probably making fun of fandom music, but honestly, I've heard actual fandom music and even actual geek rock that is better produced and more interesting than this. That said, Aatrox Got Nothing on Me is okay with its darker sound, and the emotional tracks are more boring than outright bad. It's not the worst thing ever, but the aforementioned flaws and atrocities like Aatrox Fame and especially Aatrox Roadhead drag the entire thing down. 3 out of 10.
Well, I see this is going to be one of those episodes, huh? I can't say I disagree, given how bad this album is. Let me help you. Aatrox and Aatrox. Come Back to Me are passable emotional songs that would be great if you removed all references to Aatrox and just made them normal songs. Unfortunately, they're trying to be funny, which they don't really succeed at. The rest of the songs don't really succeed at it either. It's just one joke throughout. Our main character is obsessed with Aatrox. Okay, who cares? Also, Aatrox Fame and Aatrox Roadhead are god-awful, but you knew that already. This is the epitome of unfunny comedy albums, and I'd take watching Adam Sandler over this. At least he has more than one joke, unlike this, which is basically a conservative meme minus the politics. It's horrible. 2 out of 10.
Yes, Johnny. It is going to be one of those episodes because I hate this too. The instrumentation is really only interesting on Aatrox Got Nothing on Me, but even then it gets dragged down by bad production. Keep in mind that I'm a punk fan. I don't mind bad production if it fits the style, but like you guys have been saying, it just doesn't match this bright, upbeat Indietronica sound that Literally Newt is going for. The vocals sound like a shitty pop-punk band, and the concept really isn't that funny. I get what it was trying to do, but I don't want to hear about our narrator's creepy obsession with Aatrox, nor do I want to hear about Aatrox getting a blowjob. It's not funny, and the fact that Aatrox Roadhead is a spoken word piece makes it even worse. Also, I agree 100% on the rapping on Aatrox Fame. It's awful, and while it was probably done as a joke, it's really not that funny. It's just cringe-inducing. 1 out of 10.
Wow. Has anyone other than Archibald given this higher than a 4? I don't think so, and I'm going to continue that trend, because I didn't like this album either. It's just geek humor at its least funny. The whole album is, oh my god, this video game character is amazing. I want to suck his dick. I get that it's a joke, but it feels a bit too real for most of the album for me to find it funny. I could easily see an actual obsessed fan writing something like this on AO3 or Wattpad or something. The only thing hinting that this is a joke is the ending, where Aatrox takes our narrator captive. That makes for a good ending to the story this album is telling, even if the rapping on that song is fucking awful. That said, Aatrox Got Nothing on Me is decent, and the more emotional songs are barely tolerable. That keeps this from being terrible. 3 out of 10.
I am pleasantly surprised by the amount of hatred this album has received. I thought I was going to be the harshest one. Anyway, this album sucks. I don't like the overly noisy production in general, but when paired with this bouncy, upbeat instrumentation, it just sounds bad. I get that it was probably meant to sound amateurish, like it was made in his parents' basement or something, but that doesn't make it hurt my ears any less. The vocals are terrible, and the concept does in fact read like a badly written fan fiction. Again, I know that was intentional, but that doesn't make it funny. Oh, and I don't know how anyone can listen to Aatrox Fame, Aatrox Roadhead, or that one interlude track with Aatrox's voice without dying inside a little bit. Terrible album. 2 out of 10.
Come on, Aatrox Roadhead was hilarious.
It was not.
Your loss.
Don't worry, Archibald. I'll join you in somewhat defending this album. I enjoyed the first half of this. Baytrox, Living with Aatrox, Oh Aatrox, and Sly Aatrox are all pretty fun, and I did laugh a couple times during a couple of those songs. Unfortunately, the album does kind of fall off in the back half, with boring emotional songs and bad rapping galore. There are also 2 pointless interludes in the back half that just feel like filler. The front half is strong enough for this to be decent, and I actually did chuckle a little bit at Aatrox Roadhead, even if it was pretty bad as a spoken word piece. I just wish that this album leaned completely into the ridiculous humor instead of trying to go all emotional in the second half. 6 out of 10.
Honestly, I feel like you guys aren't being hard enough on this. Maybe it's just because I've had personal experience with people who pretend to love you and then abuse you. But I found this less funny and more upsetting. I know, Aatrox is a fictional character and it's not meant to be taken seriously. If I heard this at a different point in my life, I might have given it a higher score. But as it is, I can't enjoy anything about this. The only song I can even remotely stand to listen to is Aatrox Got Nothing on Me. But even it gets ruined by the technical issues you guys have already mentioned. In fact, those technical issues keep me from enjoying any of the songs even if I force myself to ignore the lyrics. I know this is a personal thing, and I don't blame the creator for this. But I can't enjoy this at all. 0 out of 10.
I don't blame you, Sarah. Anyway, I hated this too, but not to that extent. I agree that the instrumentation is way too lively and upbeat for this incredibly abrasive, noisy production. I agree that the singer sounds like a bad pop-punk vocalist, and I agree that the concept really isn't that funny. However, I thought Aatrox Got Nothing on Me was decent, and honestly it could have been great if it had better production. The other songs are terrible though, especially the ugly-sounding Living with Aatrox and of course Aatrox Roadhead. Yeah, this album is terrible, but I won't quite give it a 0, I'll give it a 2 out of 10.
I was really not a fan of this album either. Aatrox Got Nothing on Me was okay with its darker sound, but everything else combined noisy production with upbeat instrumentation. Unlike some people here, I'm not against that on principle. That said, the fact that this is a comedy album is what ruins the combination for me. It's too happy and lacking in aggression for this level of noisiness to work. Songs like Aatrox could have at the very least sounded good with better production. However, I don't think even that could have salvaged this concept. It's just so lame and unfunny. It's like a really bad joke, which, come to think of it, is basically what it is. I especially hate Aatrox Roadhead, but y'all probably guessed that. This album sucks. 1 out of 10.
Here's a new idea for a drinking game for this review. Take 1 shot every time Aatrox Roadhead is declared the worst song on this album. Take 2 shots every time the phrase Roadhead is said. And take 3 shots every time Aatrox is said. Prepare to die of alcohol poisoning, all who partake. Anyway, this album is terrible. Aatrox Roadhead is the worst song on the album, and the concept isn't even funny. I've never played League of Legends, but I imagine that Aatrox in the game is a lot more impressive than this album makes him sound. The production is terrible, and the vocalist does indeed sound like a bad pop-punk vocalist. This album is awful. 1 out of 10.
This was admittedly pretty terrible, but I will say that the emotional songs were barely tolerable. Everything else was terrible, especially Aatrox Roadhead. Although, I will say, Aatrox Got Nothing on Me wins the award for most overrated track on this album, mainly because it's ugly sounding and serves no purpose in the context of the album. When did our protagonist go from wanting to fuck Aatrox to wanting to be better than him? Yeah, Aatrox Roadhead is the worst song on here, but Aatrox Got Nothing on Me is a close second. The plot of this album is stupid and unfunny, the production sucks, and while I don't mind the vocals, they're nothing spectacular. Terrible album, 2 out of 10.
I agree that this album is awful, and I also agree that literally Newt's other stuff is better. He's a talented guy, but this concept isn't funny to begin with, and the execution of it is obnoxious and at times gross. Yes, I'm referring to Aatrox Roadhead here. Why do you ask? The production is ugly, the vocals are ugly, and the repetition of Aatrox's name over and over again, while it does get across the point that the narrator is obsessed with Aatrox, is still incredibly annoying. Whoever thought that rap verse was a good idea needs to rethink some things. Also, I agree 100% with Jeanette that Aatrox Got Nothing on Me is overrated. That song is so ugly sounding. 1 out of 10.
I enjoyed this more than most. if only because I actually did laugh a couple of times while listening to it. Aatrox was really stupid, but it was a fun kind of stupid. Living with Aatrox was a lot of fun, and the 3 sentimental songs were quite nice. None of these songs were great, mostly because the noisy production sounded terrible with this upbeat instrumentation, but I enjoyed the ones I just mentioned. However, I will admit that the rest of the tracks were pretty bad. My least favorite was, you guessed it, Aatrox Roadhead. It was just so gross and unfunny, and the spoken word bit sounded terrible. The rap verse on Aatrox Fame was also terrible. Everything else was just pretty bad, though I will say I agree with Jeanette and Megan that Aatrox Got Nothing on Me is wildly overrated. That song sucks. Anyway, 4 out of 10.
This album was a mixed bag. I liked the first 2 tracks, Sly Aatrox was also pretty fun, and Aatrox Roadhead was actually hilarious. You guys just have no sense of humor. I will agree that Aatrox Fame is terrible thanks to that god-awful rap verse, and I'll also agree with Anne without the E that the O-O-O's on Aatrox sound terrible. Also, the last 3 reviews are 100% right about Aatrox Got Nothing on Me being overrated. That song sounds hideous. Everything else is mediocre. The combination of good, bad, and mediocre stuff on here balances it out to a perfect meh. I will say, though, that even the stuff I kind of enjoy isn't great due to bad production and a concept that doesn't really stick with me. I won't return to any of this. 5 out of 10.
You and Soda Pop have better taste than everyone else who's gone so far put together.
Thanks, I try my best.
Unfortunately for you, Archibald, I will not be added to that list. I hated every track on this album except Aatrox Got Nothing on Me. That one had a bit of an eerie sound that I did like. Everything else was a terrible mix of upbeat and noisy. I wouldn't mind this so much if there was some aggression to it, but there isn't. It just sounds like a badly produced Indie-tronica album. Also, this album basically tells the same joke on every song. All of the songs are like, I'm creepily obsessed with Aatrox even though he's an evil video game villain. We get it, man. You like Aatrox. Shut up about it. Also, the vocals on this thing are god-awful. The singer sounds like a cartoon nerd, and the rap verse on Aatrox Fame as well as the spoken word atrocity on Aatrox Roadhead made me want to die. Whoever thought those were a good idea needs help. Anyway, 1 out of 10.
This album was a calamity. It was also the following: blunder, disaster, hazard, misfortune, mistake, pileup, and setback. Yes, I did just go to thesaurus. Come and look up synonyms for calamity. How did you know? I hated everything about this album, though I will admit that the sentimental songs could have been beautiful if not for the dumb, unfunny lyrics and overly noisy production. This whole album is stupid, and it's too annoying and gross to be so in a fun way. It's just stupid. Anyone who writes songs with titles like Aatrox Roadhead, which is easily the worst song on this album, by the way, and Aatrox would be better off with AI picking their song titles. It pains me to say that, but it's true. Anyway, 1 out of 10.
This album is pretty bad, but it's not as bad as you guys are making it out to be. I thought the sentimental songs were more boring than anything, and Aatrox Got Nothing on Me has a cool sound even if the production ruins it. I will say that every other song on here is every bit as terrible as you guys have been saying, especially Aatrox Roadhead. That song was disgusting. I also agree that the production and vocals on this album are god-awful. Yeah, I may not hate this as much as most of you guys, but I still can't even come close to endorsing this. 3 out of 10.
This album fucking sucked. The only individual song on here that I would rate above a 1 is Aatrox Got Nothing on Me, if only because its darker sound was pretty cool. Everything else is a mess of unfunny jokes, bad production, sickeningly sappy instrumentation, and annoying as fuck vocals. I probably wouldn't mind the vocals if this was a punk album of some kind, but this isn't a punk album, it's an Indie-tronica album. The vocals don't match the genre, and the production doesn't match the instrumentation. Nothing about this album goes well together, and I can't stand it, especially Aatrox Roadhead and Aatrox Fame. There, I made my obligatory mentions of those two. Now, 1 out of 10.
Wow, no one has said this album is above decent yet? Okay, I guess I'll be the ugly duckling. Would I call this a great album? No, it falls off pretty hard between track 7 and track 11. That said, the first half is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. Yes, that does include the funniest song ever with Aatrox Roadhead. The instrumentation is a lot of fun, and I honestly thought the cartoon nerd vocals and bad production added to the vibe. It makes this seem like an album that some nerd would come up with in his basement, and I find it rather charming. I'll admit most of the back half is pretty boring, but that final track was hilarious. You guys just don't know how to have fun. 7 out of 10.
Wow, someone actually liked this? That's hard to believe. I wish I could say I felt the same, but I don't. I'll admit, Aatrox Got Nothing on Me and Sly Aatrox were okay. And as much as I hate to admit it, Baytrox is a little bit funny. It's just a shame that everything else ranges from boring to awful. I know everyone likes to hate on Aatrox Roadhead, and I agree, that song sucks, but it's not as bad as Aatrox Fame. As a hip-hop head, I take the bad rap verse on that song personally. Also, I'm gonna take what Mindy said a step further and say that this entire album should be called Gaytrox. It would be so much funnier, and it would fit the concept better. Anyway, 4 out of 10.
Yes, that's a great idea.
Glad you like it.
This was bad, and it would probably still be bad after that name change. That said, if every track on here sounded more like Aatrox Got Nothing on Me, it would probably be pretty good. Maybe not great, the production on that song still sucks, but it would be good. Oh, and maybe remove Aatrox Roadhead and the rap verse at the beginning of Aatrox Fame entirely. And maybe don't repeat Aatrox's name so many times. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff this album shouldn't be done and not a lot of stuff it did right. I didn't even mention the shitty production or nasal singing, but they should have been scrapped too. I do think we should link Literally Newt's music channel in the description though. That was some good art pop on his album. As for this, 3 out of 10.
Wow, you guys are being really harsh. I'll admit that it wasn't a good album, but it wasn't bad either. The only really bad songs on here are Oh Aatrox. And of course the two obvious ones, Aatrox Fame and Aatrox Roadhead. Everything else is varying degrees of tolerable, well, except for Living with Aatrox and Baytrox, both of which are fun to listen to, and the latter of which is hilarious. I'll admit I might actually return to Baytrox a couple times after this, because I was cracking up so hard when I heard that song. Also, I'm probably the only one who's gonna say this, but I honestly liked the production on this album. It was unique, if nothing else. 5 out of 10 overall, but that was mainly because it falls off heavily during the back half.
Lauren, I don't know what you're talking about. This album is terrible. Sure, Aatrox Got Nothing on Me is a great song, but everything else is just garbage. The rap verse on Aatrox Fame is terrible, as is everything about Aatrox Roadhead. Those are just the obvious ones, though. What about the horrible sounds on Oh Aatrox or the incredibly unfunny title of Baytrox? None of this is funny, and it's so poorly produced and sung that I can't even enjoy it on a musical level. It's just an incredibly annoying album, which is a shame, because, as you guys have said, literally Newt can make good music. 2 out of 10.
The idea behind this album had potential. Like you guys said, it's clearly making fun of people who romanticize villains, which is not a bad concept. That said, the execution was really cringy and annoying. Baytrox? Bad rapping? The mere concept of Aatrox Roadhead as a song? No thank you. It also doesn't help that our vocalist can't sing, and the production is terrible. Look, I play in a crust punk band with Anne and Mindy. We know that some genres can pull off terrible production. That said, indie-tronica is not one of those genres. It just sounds awful. 3 out of 10.
Okay, I'll admit this album made me jam out a couple times. Aatrox is hilarious from the title alone, and while not particularly funny, Aatrox Got Nothing on Me was a hell of a lot of fun. Other than that, though, I'll admit that this album isn't good. The more sentimental songs are boring, Aatrox Fame and Aatrox Roadhead are god-awful for obvious reasons. And the production on songs like Living with Aatrox does not match the song at all. Look, I get that this album is a joke and that it's meant to make the listener cringe, but it's just not funny to me for the most part. 4 out of 10.
I'll jump on the hate train for this album and say that it's awful. The singing was annoying enough with the singer sounding like a cartoon nerd, but when the rapping came in on that last song, I was officially done. The production was ugly, the instrumentation ranged from saccharine to ugly, and these lyrics are not funny, not a single one of them. The worst song on here is, you guessed it, Aatrox Roadhead. That song makes me want to throw up. Overall, I give this awful album a 2 out of 10. though I do agree we should link Literally Newt's better music.
Like you guys have said, this album is awful, but Literally Newt is a surprisingly good artist. I love the album he did under the name Literally Newt. This, unfortunately, was a mess of cringeworthy lyrics, bad production, and annoying vocals. The concept wasn't funny, and while the more sentimental songs were easily the best part, they still weren't very good. The worst parts were the parts you guys already said. Aatrox Roadhead, the rap on Aatrox fame, the title of Aatrox, the obnoxious repetition of Aatrox's name, and the weird sounds our singer makes on Aatrox. It's terrible. 2 out of 10.
Wow, as usual, Brad, you're only slightly less pretentious than Ken. This album was awesome. Sure, I agree that it got a little boring in the second half, but everything from Aatrox to Aatrox Roadhead was hilarious to me. It was cringe-inducing, sure, but it was meant to be. Also, the closing track, Aatrox Fame, was hilarious, and it wrapped up the album quite nicely. Remember, kids, villains are not your boyfriends. I will admit that everything between Let Me Help You, Aatrox, and Aatrox, You Have Bested Me, is pretty boring, though. 7 out of 10.
If you think Brad and Ken are pretentious for thinking this album is awful, then give me some Victorian literature and a Pitchfork article to read. This album was terrible. The best songs were boring, and the worst songs were some of the worst I've ever heard. The humor was unfunny, the production was awful, and the singer's nasal voice was extremely annoying. Oh, and Aatrox Fame and Aatrox Roadhead were terrible. Who knew? I do agree that we should link Literally Newt's better music in the description, though. I think we all agree on that. 2 out of 10.
Yes, Lionel. I think we all do. Anyway, this album is a mixed bag. I liked Aatrox because it was funny. Aatrox Got Nothing on Me because of its interesting sound, and I even thought Sly Aatrox was pretty underrated. Also, Aatrox Roadhead is hilarious, and you guys are pretentious as hell. As for the other songs, I will admit Aatrox Fame and Aatrox are pretty terrible, and the more sentimental songs are just boring. I will say the idea behind this album was a good one, but the execution was a bit hit or miss. Overall, it gets a 5 out of 10.
Okay, we've got 2 7s, 2 6s, 3 5s, 5 4s, 5 3s, 10 2s, 10 1s, and 1 0. The average of that is apparently a solid 3. Wow, we were not a fan of this one. Sorry, Literally Newt. I'm sure you're a great guy and you have made good music. This just isn't it. Oh well, at least 2-Bit and James enjoyed it. Anyway, that's our video. Don't forget to do all that YouTube algorithm stuff. Again, I'm Laura Ingraham, and these guys are Sarah Palin, Michelle Bachmann, Ann Coulter, Megan Kelly, Marjorie Green, Lauren Boebert, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Presley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Corey Bush, Paris Hilton, Alex Trebek, Pat Sajak, Vanna White, Ken Jennings, James Holzhauer, Brad Rutter, Anne Frank, Mindy McCready, Greta Thunberg, Ponyboy Curtis, Soda Pop Curtis, Derry Curtis, Steve Randall, 2-Bit Matthews, Dally Winston, Johnny Cade, Phileas Fogg, Megan Phelps Roper, Ellen Ripley, Janet McCurdy, Miranda Cosgrove, Archie Bunker, Lionel Frost, and Archibald Snatcher, and this is Team Counterculture signing off.